This might be for life. Yeah. This might be for life. Stand up when the chief is here. Hands up. Yeah, the chief is here. Stand up when the chief is here. Hands up. Yeah, the chief is here. Yeah, this might be for life.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our S Group podcast. We haven't done one in a long time, actually, and I've missed them. And I must say, I love that introduction. Lauren, thank you very much. It's more for me than for anyone else. I never had a nickname for 57 years of my life. And then I won't give you the reason why, but I wore this crazy headdress in Africa Burn. There's a picture of me, got a 1,000-mile stare. And people said, oh, you're the chief, and it stuck. So I got my first nickname ever, and it stuck. But I'm very proud to welcome our amazing guest, Dr. Corné Mulder. Corné's in Pretoria. I met him 10 days or so ago, and he's the ultimate politician. He's intelligent. He's calm, unlike me. He doesn't rant and rave, unlike me. And what an honor to have you on here, Corné.
Thank you, Rob. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here tonight. I'm looking forward to our discussion tonight. And it's really a privilege. And yes, we are living in very interesting times at the moment. Things are happening in the country. And it's good that we have this kind of discussion, because I think that we all should be involved and play our part in taking our country forward.
Thank you very much. As most of my friends know, and the people in the Smut BNS group, I'm a hardcore DA fan, funder, and supporter. But I'm a big fan of Musi Maimane. He's a great friend of mine. I actually had lunch with him today. And I'm a big fan of Herman Mashaba. I think he's doing some great things. AfriForum, and many other groups. There are sort of very good groups out there. But my big question to you right now is, tell us, what is the Freedom Front Plus? What does the Free FF Plus stand for? I mean, I went through the wiki, but would you tell the audience?
Yeah, sure. No, the Freedom Front Plus is one of the political parties that has been in the new dispensation since 1994. We registered the party about a month before the 1994 election, and we then participated in that election. If your viewers could remember, perhaps, that during the CODESA process, there were 26 parties participating. 19 took part in the first election, and we were the seventh largest. The 7 were elected to parliament, 19 were on the ballot. 7 made it to parliament, and we were the 4th. So we've been in parliament since 1994 in every election, and the party did quite well in the last election as well. Now, the Freedom Front Plus is a political party, and the one thing about politics that I like is that the fact that it evolves from time to time. Obviously, things change and parties adapt as well. So the party, when it started, basically was coming through the process of the previous dispensation, and it was mainly focused on the Afrikaner community as such, going into the new dispensation. About 5 years ago, the party changed its mission statement, and the party said, well, we would like to be a political party that looks out for the interests of minorities in South Africa, because we are of the view that the true test of a real democracy is, how do you look after the minorities? How do you protect the rights of the minorities? So the party repositioned itself, and we are in that vein taking it further. And I would say that the whole notion of not only individual rights, but the reality that South Africa is a very diverse society. That's why our constitution says 11 official languages, and that we say you must also accommodate communities and group rights, and that takes us to the whole idea of self-determination and all what's involved in that process.
But fundamentally, you're a Judeo-Christian, capitalist, democracy, believing, free market party. Yeah. Okay. So the issues that the audience are very keen on, and I'll just head them up and we'll talk about them a little bit later, are EWC, gun ownership, and Cape independence. Those are the 3 main topics that I want to address here. There are many other topics, but before we do that, just tell us, how many seats have you got? You've got about 4%, 4 to 5% of the voters, haven't you, at the moment?
Yes. At the moment in Parliament, we've got 10 members in the National Assembly, and we've got 2 in the National Council of Provinces. And then the interesting thing is, if you take the last election in 2019, we had 48 political parties on the ballot. And of that 48 parties, 14 made it into parliament, and the Freedom Front Plus ended up as the 5th largest party. You first have the ANC, then the DA, then the EFF, the IFP, and then it's us. So you'll also find that in our 9 provincial legislatures, there are only 3 parties that are represented in all 9, and then the next party is the Freedom Front Plus. We are represented in 8 of the 9 provinces. We are only not represented in KZN, but I guess after what happened last week, we will change that in the next election as well.
That's promising to hear. I like to hear that. And primarily, you get Afrikaans, farmer, middle class, rural votes, primarily. I mean, okay.
No, we don't.
Correctly.
Let me assist. At the moment in South Africa, I would say there's less than 40,000 commercial farmers in South Africa. You need almost 50,000 votes to get one person elected. So our support base is not farmers or rural areas, not at all. It's urban. It's across the spectrum. It's across the board. And we're also a national party in that sense, having representation across the board. And that's why we have members elected in 8 of the 9 provinces. So our support is from various sectors of society, from the young, from the middle class, across the board, right across the board.
And if you took FF Plus and the DA, what are the main differences? I'm sure you've actually got a lot of similarities because you have worked together in municipalities.
Yes.
What are the differences?
Well, there are a number of similarities, but there are also differences in that sense. I would say the Democratic Alliance focuses more on individual rights primarily. We say individual rights is good, but it's not good enough. We also need to recognize the diversity, and that takes us to group rights and recognition of communities. So we feel very strongly about the fact that we should do away with Black economic empowerment based on race, obviously. We should do away with affirmative action based on race. Mother tongue education to us is very important, and we feel very strongly about not only autonomy, but the whole idea of which takes us to independence and self-determination. I think on a strategic point of view, the difference would be that the DA still strives for, let's say, the notion of a rainbow nation, that everything will be just perfect and we can return to that, and they hope to get control of the union buildings. We've moved beyond that in the sense that we say South Africa is a colonial construct to a certain extent if you look at the boundaries, and we need to change all of that, and that brings the whole idea of self-determination, autonomy, and independence as well.
I think the DA would agree with you on much greater autonomy. And I think when you have private conversations with senior people in the DA, they do respect Cape independence. But, you know, they're a national party and they believe that they should be fighting for South Africa. And I get that. Should we go straight to Cape independence? Because we've kind of led into that one already. Is Cape, you're head of the Western Cape, aren't you, for FF Plus? Tell us about Cape independence.
Yes, well, the reason why I'm laughing, Rob, is this. If you say that the DA has got a lot of sympathy for Cape independence, they've got no choice. The majority of the 800,000 people that in the Western Cape has now joined Cape Exit and they are supporting Cape independence have voted for the DA in the last election. And if they do not have support this, obviously those people will found a new political home. And we hope to be that home, obviously. Now, let me just put it in this way. I would like to start off by saying, you know, South Africa is a very, very diverse society. And sometimes we forget that. And that's why we need to keep that in mind. During the negotiation process, right at the beginning of the Constitution, I was there. An ad was published in all the media, and the ad tried to explain to what is the problem, what we are doing. And the ad said the following, and it used the figures of those days. It said, South Africa, 20 million women, 18 million men, 8 religions, 25 church denominations, 31 cultural groups, 14 languages, 9 race groups, 1 country. And that just gives an impression of the real diversity. So the problem is this. We say that we ended up with an arbitrary colonial boundary drawn in 1910, and we were then all told that we are South Africans. Nothing wrong with that. After 1994, an American journalist I met asked me, now, tell me how many people speak South African? And I said, nobody. We have different languages. There's no language called South African. That's why we have 11 official languages. So The whole idea of self-determination that we feel very strongly about, people should understand that there are different forms and levels of self-determination. Right from let me start off. You'll have personal, individual rights, for example. But then you have more evolved, perhaps community rights or communal rights. You may have autonomy. You may have provincial, more autonomy. You may have regions that are autonomous. There are many examples. You may have federalism, and it goes up different levels until where you may end up with an independent state for a community or for a territorial entity. Now, our position is that if you talk about Cape independence, it's not a question of either this or nothing else. We say it is both. In other words, certain areas in South Africa tend to lean towards the possibility to have independence, and the Cape is exactly such a situation. But if you look at other parts of the country, there are lower levels of self-determination possible. It's not possible to have an independent country or to become independent, for example, let's say in Limpopo. It's just the reality of the demographics and the history, etc., etc. So if one takes all of that into consideration, you have to adapt and accommodate all the different realities. If you come to the Western Cape, then I say to people, those that do not take cognizance of what's happening in the Western Cape does not know what's going on in South Africa. If you look at the organization like Cape Exit, when we started before COVID last year, they had 7,000 signed up members. They've now got more than 800,000, 90% plus are in the Western Cape, and me too, and my whole family as well.
I've signed.
There you see something that brings us together across party political lines. And with all due respect, if we look what happened in South Africa a week ago, then people would realize that independence is not a nicety to have, it's a necessity. I'm convinced that in the end, you will not survive as minorities on this continent of Africa without having land under your feet, where you can take your decisions, where you can have a community and have certain values being respected, where you can have a free market economy, where you can have law and order, etc. All those things that go with an independent state. Without that, we will not survive in Africa. So I support it very strongly, and the Freedom Front Plus supports this, but it's part of not either one or the other. It's a both situation, and that's the reality.
I feel quite sorry for my friends in KZN. You know, what are they going to do?
Unfortunately, that's the reality, and one must do what you can do to protect our people. But people must also look around and understand what is going on.
No, I'm a fan of Cape independence. I mean, is it possible? Is it achievable? Is it feasible? Yes, I think it is, but I want to hear it from you.
It is absolutely so. I've been in Parliament since 1988. For what it's worth, I'm currently the longest serving member of Parliament. I had 6.5 years prior to 94, and I've been there every day since 1994. I was involved in the writing of the Constitution. Now, all the independence movements in South Africa at the moment all quote Section 235 of the Constitution, this little book. I was privileged to propose Section 235 and the wording in the Constitutional Assembly when the Constitution was written. Obviously, we would have preferred to have a much better worded constitutional provision. But obviously, it was a question of balance of powers, and the ANC was not prepared to go further than we hoped them to go. If I may say about the Constitution, I'll come to independence and the legality of that. There's a notion to say quite often that this is the best constitution in the world. It's not true. And also that this is the final constitution, also not true. There's never a final constitution. It's only the current constitution. The constitution can be changed or amended. It's a good constitution. The practical problem is, and that's a different discussion, we have basically two constitutions in this one. What I mean with that, you'll find the best international practice in the constitution in numerous places. But all of that is then qualified with exceptions. You must do this and this. However, if you need to advance previously disadvantages, then you can do this, that, and the other. I had a speech the other day in Parliament, and I said, all the corruption, all the things that went wrong in the last 25 years happened within this constitution. Now, if you look at Section 235 and the whole idea of independence, I've got no doubt that it's possible. Sometimes people make the mistake and they would say, yeah, but the ANC will never allow that. That's mistake number one. Never put your future in the hands of anybody else. It's not for the ANC to decide what people want or how they would like to have their future. We will decide ourselves. And obviously, the first prize would be what I would always call an internationally recognized, negotiated settlement. That's the first prize. If you can prevent conflict or strife or whatever the case may be, I would like to prevent that. So the process will evolve, but you can't claim something because you want it if it doesn't exist. You first create a reality, and then the law will follow to recognize that. In other words, you can't go somewhere where there's nothing happening and say, I want to have an independent state, and there's nothing, it doesn't exist. You first create a
what's the trigger? So what's the trigger? So we've got this petition going, or this poll,
yes,
of over 800,000. I think it's 820,000 now. It's going to get to 1 million with all the people listening to us speaking. It'll go through 1 million. And then what happens? What's the trigger point?
Well, the trigger point is, first of all, you won't get away with what you want unless you do have a referendum, and you may have more than one referendum. But people should not think that the referendum is the end of all. It may be just the beginning. And once you have a referendum and you win that referendum, the powers to be will take note that this is serious and they have to address that. So I'm putting all the cards on the table. People must be realistic. You don't call for a referendum until you know that you're going to win that referendum. Because
who calls for it and who votes?
Well, if you look at the current constitution, for example, and that makes it a bit difficult, but it's not a problem. The current constitution says that the president on national level does have the right to call a referendum, but he can only call a national referendum. But the constitution also says that the premier of a province can call a provincial referendum. And then in our province, the Western Cape, it's got its own constitution, and it also has a provision that says the premier can call a referendum. So in practical terms, when it comes to the Western Cape, for example, the premier has the right to call a referendum. However, there is a technical hiccup at this stage because both provisions says in terms of national legislation, and the national legislation that we do have are outdated. It comes from before 1994. So that national legislation needs to be amended and to be brought up to speed to make it possible. So who calls that referendum? Technically, the premier can call the referendum. When will he call the referendum? He will call that referendum if he understands that the people in the province are serious about this and they really want that. How will he know that? If people sign up and join organizations like Cape Exit and they vote for political parties that are serious about that. And there are other ways as well. Let's take a look into the future. In 2024 is the next election on national and provincial level. I foresee that we will have a coalition after 2024 on the Western Cape, and I intend that the Freedom Front Plus will be part of that coalition government. And we will go into that coalition government with one of our demands will be the right to have a referendum on independence if it's not held prior to that reality. So there will be all kinds of processes that will come up in making this a reality. And obviously, as the ANC continue to stumble and fall and destroy the country, even after KZN now, the whole idea is gaining momentum each and every day.
And who votes? Is it residents of the Western Cape? I know there's a demarcated boundary, so it's very easy to determine who lives where, but it's people who live here.
Obviously, what needs to be done then is that the Electoral Commission will have to look at the voters' roll. At the moment, they know exactly who are the voters registered in the Western Cape, and they should be eligible to vote.
Got it. Well, I'm a fan, I have to say. I'm 100% in the camp of Cape independence.
Yeah, sure.
Apologies. Let's quickly move on to the two other topics. The two that worry me the most. When I came back to South Africa after 31 years abroad, I had a couple of conditions. One, I was not going to invest in this country. I came back because I reckoned we had 4 years left before Zuma would destroy everything. And he was on path to do it. I mean, that guy should be in jail. He's a gangster. I can say it, you shouldn't. And all the people around him, and most of the ANC. I can say that. But my conditions were, I'm not going to invest in the country. And then Cyril got elected and my wife said, well, what does that mean? And I said, we've just kicked the can down the road. And when lockdown started, I sent out a message to a lot of my Smart BNS group friends saying, civil unrest's coming. We got to get organized. I was 12, 15 months too early but it's happened. I got my gun license. I told everyone else to, blah, blah, blah. And I have, with Nick Ferguson, bought an airport. So I'm actually staying. I'm not going to leave. I'm committed to stay. This is my country. I'm South African. I'm an African. End of story. I'm not leaving. Taking my gun away is just fundamentally the big line through me. In the Second Amendment, the wording that really hit me hardest in America is to protect the individual against the tyranny of government. In the Second Amendment, the tyranny of government. So in that Second Amendment, it actually says you're giving you your gun for self-defense against government. And that's exactly what happened last week. Civil action groups stepped up to defend property, people, taxi associations stood up. What's your view on that? Can that get through this ludicrous? And Becky Tseli, if you're listening, I want to talk to you because you're being very stupid and evil here.
Well,
so
let me put it this way, Rob. We have reason to believe that the people that are behind the current proposed amendment bill are people obviously favoring the whole gun-free South Africa idea, which is a very naive and idealistic little idea. I would have loved to see them last week when the riots happened in KZN to go and stand in front of the looters and say, whoa, here's the Constitution. You're not allowed to do this. Go away. It doesn't work that way. So what we've got at the moment is an amendment bill. And in that the bill there are certain proposals. And one of them is to take the right away for you to own a license for self-defense, which is ridiculous. If you look across the world, it doesn't make sense. So from the point where we have the amendment bill being published until becoming law one day, there's a long process. So that's being published. There's an opportunity for commentary to be sent. There's a proposal for a whole process. From the Freedom Front Plus's point of view, we've got a petition running at the moment. Other organizations and parties are doing exactly the same to put the necessary pressure on government and to bring them to their senses. And then there will be experts, et cetera, and we will go through that whole process. However, after what happened last week, I think government should understand that this is a big no-no. And if you want to draw a line in the sand, I think this is going to be it. Why? Not because we are unreasonable, not because we want conflict and violence, because the state just has proven now that it's not capable of protecting the citizens in this country. So I'm not going to be at my home or my business or whatever the case may be, unarmed and hoping that somebody will protect my wife or my family or whatever that be. We will have to do those things ourselves. So that's the reality. So I think it's a very enlightening notion sometimes to use the word no. So when it comes to this, I think South Africans should jointly understand and say to government, the answer is no. We will not be disarmed. That's it.
And this is where the Freedom Front Plus, DA, Inkatha, Action SA are all working together. I mean, all of these organizations agree on that, yeah?
Absolutely. We all agree on that, and we have different strategies how to take the whole thing forward, et cetera. But in the end, it's up to the citizens and civil society also to be involved, and they are involved, and to make it clear that the answer is no. You cannot allow yourself to be disarmed. Unfortunately, that's the reality. In an independent, in an independent Cape or an independent state or an independent situation in that sense, we will have a government that will have a capability with a police force to protect its citizens, to maintain law and order, and then still I would have the right as one of my civil rights to have a firearm for whatever I need it for.
I mean, the intelligence services, police services have shown themselves to be incompetent from a management, an ANC level. And I could then follow that to say the ANC is incompetent at every level. And it's pretty damn clear. It's pretty clear. I mean, they couldn't run a piss up in a brewery if they tried. Yeah.
Yes,
and that's 26 years. It's been a disaster.
Absolutely. They got hold 26 years ago of the most developed, the most modern, the best infrastructure, the best economic grid, the best defense force in Africa. And they've destroyed most of it.
They've broken and stolen just about everything. I mean, the ANC are a joke. For my ANC friends on here, wake up and stop voting ANC, and don't vote the racist EFF either. But I can say that. let's get on to EWC. I mean, I've got some friends who are trying to justify EWC. I just cannot see it justified in any sense. It's scaring away foreign investors. It's frightening everybody. And even if people in the ANC say, yes, but it's been in the constitution under the apartheid regime, it's no big deal, there are all these protections in EWC. The reality is it'll be weaponized in the wrong hands. And if you hand it to gangsters like Zuma and others, it'll be weaponized. They'll take away anything you want. So how do we stop that one?
I don't want to be perhaps too optimistic, but I think we have stopped it. And I'll explain why I'm saying that. I have had the privilege or the burden. I've been serving on the committee that deals with the attempt to amend Section 25, the ad hoc committee. I've been serving on that for the last 3 years. I've attended 90% of those meetings. I've been in the thick and thins of all of that. There's 11 members on that committee. ANC's got 6, opposition's got 5, DA 2, I'm there, and IFP is there, and then the DA's got 2. Now, the first point is that the previous dispensation, even in the previous apartheid constitution, there was no provision that made possible expropriation without compensation. Expropriation with compensation is internationally recognized reality. Why? Sometimes the government needs to expropriate a piece of land to build a railway track. And then that person is being paid market-related value to their property. So all states have that kind of situation. What we are talking now about is something completely different. All kinds of beautiful words, which in basic English means we want a provision that allow us to steal and take your property. That's all that it means. Nothing more, nothing less. So the problem is this. Section 25 that deals with this. So the committee has got the instruction to amend Section 25 to make it possible. The problem is Section 25 luckily is retrenched in the Constitution as part of the Bill of Rights, and you need the 2/3 majority. So we've been in that committee having a struggle for many, many years, and the public participated and they made contributions, and some are taken seriously and some are ignored, etc., etc. The problem started after the ANC's conference at Nasrec in 2017, when Cyril and his friends won and they were still happy. The other sector basically adopted quickly a resolution there that they need to expropriate. And now the ANC is in a fix. The EFF tries to push this because they believe all property should belong to the state. They are still romantic about Venezuela and Cuba and all the pariah things in the world. Yes, absolutely. Idiotic. So the ANC is in a very difficult position, and we've succeeded in pressurizing them. And with all due respect, I did set them a trap, and I must say that. The first bill that was published was a different bill, and we had commentary on that, and then they found themselves that bill is not what they want, and now they've got a problem. So in the end, there were all kinds of bilaterals. We were involved, ANC were involved. Where we are tonight, the ANC needs 237 votes to amend the Constitution. The ANC has got only 230 votes. They need 37 more votes. The Freedom Front Plus won't give our votes to them. Neither would the IFP, neither would the Democratic Alliance. Now they've got a problem. The only party that can assist them then would be the EFF. They've got 40 seats. So they need the EFF. The problem is the EFF wanted to blackmail them, politically speaking, because they wanted them to provide in the Constitution that all property, not only land, all property be deferred to the state and the state become the custodian of all property. And the ANC has got a problem. They are bound by the resolution. So it's quite clear that there's a breakdown between the ANC and the EFF. So where we are tonight, the ANC then adopted their version of the bill last week. It's been published over the weekend, and the public can make comment on that until the 13th of August. Then the committee will look at that again. It will come to Parliament. The ANC will bring it to a vote. I believe it will not get 237 votes. It will be defeated in the House, and the Constitution will remain as is, and we can continue with our lives.
A foreigner listening to this might say, well, why don't 30, 40 of the moderate ANC members vote against it? Was that not possible?
It could happen. If the ANC had enough members to make it possible to amend, that could have been a very important thing. But even if all the ANC members vote with the ANC, there's still are 37 short. And I honestly believe we will defeat this whole attempt. I honestly believe that. If I'm wrong, I'll come back and I'll say I'm sorry, but if we succeed, I did predict that. But the problem is this: we have a party political system, and you can't get away from party politics. People quite often say, no, we want to get away from politics. It doesn't work that way. That's the reality. So those ANC members cannot vote against their party, because if they do so, they will be expelled from the party. If you look at what happened to Zuma, for example, not one of the attempts to bring a motion of no confidence in him in parliament succeeded. It could never succeed. Why? The ANC could not be seen that the opposition party succeeds in removing their leader. It only succeeded when the ANC internally decided to recall Zuma. So the same happens here. But the luck is that the ANC doesn't have 2/3, and we must prevent it.
Let's take Tito Mboweni. I don't know if he's a member of parliament. Must be, yeah, is it? Let's take a couple of decent ANC members who've just had it with the ANC. Even Cyril, I reckon, doesn't really want EWC to happen, I would guess. He's too intelligent for that, surely. What if they're 10, 15 who know they're going to get expelled after the fact, but realize that for once in history, they have to do the right thing? For once, they have a chance, and they stand up and vote against it. Is that possible or not?
Theoretically, it's possible, but there's a bigger game behind the scenes, and that game is about the franchise. The franchise called the ANC. And there's a huge internal struggle and a fight for who controls that franchise. So Cyril and his group are trying to get rid of the bad apples, if you can call them that, Ace Magashule and others, and they try to get hold of this franchise. And obviously the other group tries to get rid of them and to get hold of the franchise, because the franchise is well known and people tend just to vote on instinct for the franchise. But that brings us to the question: is it possible for the ANC as an institution to self-correct? And my view is the answer is no. The answer is no. We will not, never mind independence. If you want to turn South Africa around, we will not succeed until we have defeated the ANC as well.
But more and more ANC members I'm speaking to are disillusioned, disappointed, disgusted with their own ANC.
Yes.
And yet, you know, they're not voting. I mean, there's 16 million people did not vote at all. So how do we get those 16 million to register and vote for anyone but the ANC and the EFF? And how do we get enough ANC members to say, you know?
Sure. It's happening. The reality is the following. Our electoral system is a good system. I know people sometimes are very much in favor of changing the system. They must be very careful. Once you start to tamper with the system and you get that process going, the ANC will obviously manipulate that process to change the electoral system to keep themselves in power for another 20 years. We must be very careful. Now, luckily, the current system is a proportional system. So what we need is, the moment we get the ANC below 50%, there's a very strong incentive to form a coalition government. And that is where we are going to end up in South Africa. Coalition government is going to be on the table, and there's a huge debate about that. What we had in the past is not necessarily coalitions. In Tswana, we had a minority government. In Johannesburg, it was a minority government. In Nelson Mandela Bay, it was a minority. I'm talking about majority coalitions. So what could happen is that if the split in the ANC continues, the ANC as a party may split, and we may get a realignment where the radicals and the EFF come together in some form of revolutionary guard, whatever the case may be, party. And the moderate, more thinking people in the ANC may form another grouping. In the end, what we need to do is the following, and that's why opposition parties need to go to the electorate and get as much votes as possible. Let me give you an example. In the last election in 2019, the Freedom Front Plus took away 250,000 votes from the Democratic Alliance. Those votes are not lost, because they are now with a party that would act responsibly, that would be prepared also to participate in coalitions, and we've been participating, and we are currently still in coalitions also with the Democratic Alliance. What the DA needs to do is, they should focus and get votes away from the ANC. Those disillusioned ANC members should feel that their natural home, if they leave the ANC, is to go to a party like the Democratic Alliance. And in doing so, we bring together a broad group of supporters across political party lines of, I almost said normal thinking people, but let's say realistic thinking people. And then you can form a realistic coalition that can bring prosperity and the necessary stability. And I think that's the route that will happen in South Africa, because just in terms of the proportional system, obviously a party like the IFP makes a much better and a much stronger appeal in the election for their traditional home base to vote for whom? For the IFP. And the same with us that reach out to different minorities in South Africa, not only Afrikaner, not only the white minority community, all the minority communities, and we get support across the board. And the DA's got a certain niche market, and they need to take votes away from the ANC, and other parties should do the same. And then in the end, you will form a coalition in the best interest of South Africa. And we need to
So let's get on to coalition. But I've got a good question that's come up here from my buddy, Solly Moeng. Solly, I didn't know your first name was Nicodemus. I like that. Nicodemus, great. Solly asks, have you thought of the ANC's power over the IEC? Many people are still naive, believing all elections have been free and fair.
Well,
oh dear.
Yes. Yeah, sure. No, Nicodemus is a beautiful name. It comes out of the Bible as well. Now, the point is, there was a time that the Electoral Commission was known as the IEC, the Independent Electoral Commission. The name changed along the lines, but I would like to believe that the Electoral Commission is still independent. I really would like to believe that. And it's obviously up to all of us to make sure that nothing can go wrong. In other words, if all opposition parties play their role during elections by monitoring the process, by being in the polling stations, by looking at everything, it's impossible for whoever would like to amend or change in the results. And I really feel that we can still do that. And obviously, the ANC, every 10 years, we have a debate in Parliament about 10 years of democracy and ANC rule. And then I every year, 10 years say, well, happily, that's 10 years less of ANC rule. And it's only a question of time when the ANC will be defeated. It's a question of time.
Yeah, but Roman Cabernac, morning shot. Roman, thank you for coming on. He's a great hero, by the way. He says, with respect to Mr. Mulder, Dr. Mulder, the future of SA in an enclave is an enclave system. The ANC is not going to be voted out by hook or by crook. If that is the case, that they're going to use all methods, clean, dirty, whatever, to stuff the ballot, to force the IEC to do legal and illegal things, we then have to hope it splits. The ANC breaks in half. Is that possible? Is Roman right?
It's possible, yes. It's possible. Well, obviously, it's very easy for a party like the ANC to proclaim that they are these huge Democrats until you lose power, or until you're about to lose power. Then the real test would come. Are you really Democrats? The fact of the matter is, we cannot put our future in a situation where we can be in a position, what happened in Zimbabwe, for example, where President Mugabe lost that referendum and the results were cheated and changed, and he stayed in power. And that's why we feel so strongly also about autonomy, but also self-determination and independence. I cannot put my future in the hands of a majority ANC kind of government. That's a bonus. If we can turn all of South Africa around, that's fine, that's perfect. But I don't have too much hope that we will succeed in doing that, unless we get the ANC below 50%. And that's why independence also for the Cape, and if other areas are possible, let's go for it.
So let's talk about that. Let's assume the ANC, we've got municipal elections supposed to be October. Now they're saying there'll be a delay of a few months, yeah? Which is maybe not a bad thing. We have more time to prepare, more time to raise money for the DA, for the FF Plus, for Action SA. Let's assume the municipals go badly for the ANC, which I think they will, because we can see them. ANC cannot run cities and cannot run provinces. Everybody knows that. We just need to persuade the national population they can't run a country either, which is becoming increasingly clear. So let's assume they get to a point where the ANC is under 50% and coalition politics comes into force. You know, Action SA, FF Plus, DA are not that far apart. They're really not that far apart. And, you know, then you have maybe Musi Maimane appearing and a few others, Vusi Tembakwaya. Come on, Vusi, get into politics. We love you. When that happens, is there a possibility that we can take control of the country, this platform? Because if you can create this platform, all these groups, I think the members of the ANC will jump ship. Ministers will jump ship.
Yes, it is possible. I've got no doubt that it's possible. let's just look at the local government elections. I think it's most likely that it's going to be postponed. If Judge Moseneke recommends that, it's unlikely that the Electoral Commission will say we don't listen. So it's very likely that it may be extended. I think then we will have to use the time, the extra 4 months, and prepare better and have better success. I honestly believe that the ANC is going to have a terrible election. And my vision from the Freedom Front Plus's point of view, and I'm responsible for the Western Cape, I've said my intention is to drive the ANC out of the Western Cape in each and every council where they are still at the moment. I want that they've got no contribution to make. But the point is, we may get to that point where the ANC loses control. So it will first happen on local government level, where we'll get control perhaps of some of the metros and some of the councils, and those will be coalitions. That will be the foundation building up to 2024. And if the ANC implodes, which we hope they will do, they may go below 50%. Then a coalition is possible. And let me just explain in terms of coalitions that I think it's important to understand. People will say, well, coalitions are not stable. What we've had in the past are not really coalitions. In the past, we've had parties working together to take control of the council. And then the discussions would be, okay, who would be the mayor? And I would like to be the deputy mayor. And you could be the speaker. That's not a coalition. That's an agreement about positions. If you look at the German system, for example, what happens is parties go into the election with their own platforms. No one wins an outright majority. Then they negotiate. And they create a new platform, which is a compromise. So I would say the following things are unnegotiable for me. And I take that into a compromise, and that's a new platform. And then they govern for the next 5 years in that term, in terms of that agreed platform. And if you do that, then you'll find that the parties you've mentioned just now may have many things in common that make it possible to form governments, coalition governments, as well as accommodating the specific aspirations of the individual groups. But then you have different parties cooperating. So my prediction is in South Africa, we will never get to the point where one single political party alone will defeat the ANC. The system doesn't allow for that. It doesn't have to. If you look at international examples of coalitions, for example, in Germany, the largest party will get 35%. Then they've won the election, but they've only got 35%. Then they form coalition government, and the government almost makes for a good government because it brings stability and compromise.
So I want to bring up 2 points here. Willem Taljaard has made a great comment, and then Mark Hyman has asked the question. So, Lauren, if you could raise Willem Taljaard's comment. With over 18 million people on government grants, ANC grants the total electorate will remain unbalanced in a vicious circle. It's the bribe, Vote
Yes.
for us, social grant. And then Mark Hyman follows with a question of the 18 million registered voters, 10 million are on social grants, excluding child grants. How are we going to overcome the social security grant vote?
Yes, it's a very difficult one. It's a huge challenge because we must never, ever underestimate the ANC. People must really understand that. The ANC is a party that's been in existence for more than 100 years. They've struggled to get hold of the levers of power. And they are not voluntarily going to relinquish those levers of power. You must understand that. So because of that, they've got a system in terms of elite empowerment. The elite is all being empowered, and you see where all the corruption and the contracts are going. And then you have the middle class, who are now many of them are in the civil service and are being accommodated in those spheres. And then you've got the social grounds. And with that kind of position, they try to keep control. Our philosophy is exactly the opposite. We say you need to get the economy to grow. Once the economy grows, real jobs are created. And a government's point of what the government needs, we need less government, not more government. Government should get out of the way. Government should make it possible for business to do their job. Then real jobs are created. I've sat in many committees in Parliament when the ANCs would ask the officials of government, how many jobs have you created? And then they give figures of so many more people employed in the department. Those are not job creation. Those are just dishing out salaries. You've not created a single job. We need to get the economy growing. So it's going to be a huge challenge. And as long as the economy is in this difficult position, people will tend to go for social grants. But the reality is, my brother served as a deputy minister for 5 years in the agricultural department. And in one of those meetings, one of the cabinet ministers said, and he listened, they forgot that he was there. And one of them said, I don't want to be in government the day that we can no longer pay social grants. And I believe that because of our financial and fiscal position, because of corruption, because of our debt, because of our downgrades, government may implode because they may get to the position that they are just physically not it just becomes impossible. The money is gone. It's been stolen and the economy is not growing. So it's a difficult one, and I'm not going to say it's easy, but the answer is, and that's why I sometimes get so angry with the ANC. You have wasted 26 years that we can never get back. South Africa could have been the real jewel of Africa by now. You started off with everything in your favor. The whole world applauded you. You've had the best infrastructure. Even the white community said, we are not the enemy. We are prepared. We could be your allies. All we ask is to respect the things that are important to us. The ANC couldn't resist, and they've destroyed everything. So we've lost a lot of time, a lot of chances. I'm all for trying to rescue what is known as South Africa. But in the end, I also believe that we will not survive without a geographical area where we can control and take our own decisions. You cannot put your future in the hands of someone else to decide on your behalf. Either you have independence and are free to rule and govern yourselves, or you are not. And that's the reality in South Africa and in Africa. And there are many, many examples, and we must go forward on that basis as well.
Corné, you said two words that no one in the ANC mentions ever: economic growth.
Yeah.
When have you last heard a minister talk about economic growth? They don't even know what it is. And when friends of mine overseas say, can you describe the situation South Africa is in? I do the following. I say, population growth, 2%. Economic growth, less than 1%. Heading for disaster. That's it.
Exactly.
I mean, what else can you say? That describes the thing. You've got to get economic growth up to 3, 4, 5%, which is entirely possible. Remove red tape, reduce the number of ministers, stop breaking, stop stealing. And end result, get rid of the ANC is the answer.
Absolutely. South Africa will
just hopeless.
Absolutely. South Africa will not succeed until we get rid of the ANC. I honestly believe the ANC cannot self-correct. They forget about that. They're not capable of doing so. So we'll have to do our own thing. In the end, I'm not prepared. You mentioned earlier that you're an African. In 1998, Mr. Mbeki held a speech in Parliament in which he said, I'm an African. And I responded in a speech and I said, if I have to speak in racial terms, I'm a white African. I'm not a European. My family came in 1685. The language I teach my children, Afrikaans, are called after our continent. The people I belong to, the Afrikaner, are called to this continent. We're all African. But I've got no intention that anybody is going to push us out of this continent. We've got just as much right to be here than anybody else. I'm prepared to work in cooperation with everybody. But if I look at what the ANC has got in mind for me, if I look at what the EFF has got in mind for me, if I look at what happened in KZN, I would be very naive and blind not to take the necessary steps. And that means also to go down the route of independence and to have a geographical base where we can survive in Africa. And then just imagine what it could be like. Just imagine the potential of how could we create such a state and how wonderful it can be, economically speaking, in all respects.
Eric Vesh has just made a comment that makes a lot of sense. He says, sadly, a stay-away vote is a vote for the ANC. So we've got to get those 16, 17 million people to register and vote for FF Plus, DA, Inkatha, Action SA.
Could I just explain why you're saying that? And I just want to explain that. In the end, all votes are working back to percentages. In other words, if you get 10% of the vote, you will have 10% representation. So let's use a little example. Let's say there are 10 voters going out to vote. 6 vote for the ANC and 4 vote for the opposition parties. That would mean that the ANC would get 60% of the seats and the representation. Opposition parties would get 4, that's 40%. However, if one of the opposition parties members, one of those 10, one of the 4 opposition members say, it's not worth to go and vote, I'm going to stay at home. What happens now? The ANC still gets 6 votes. But now the opposition only has 3 votes. One person stayed at home. The result is now the ANC is suddenly, without getting one more vote, it's got 6 votes out of 9. They suddenly have 2/3 majority because opposition stayed away. And people need to understand that. We need to register and get out there and take everybody else, take your family, take your friends, and go and vote. That's the way we need to do it.
Well, I've just had a wonderful comment from Robert King on the chat bot. He just registered online, took him less than 5 minutes. So he's registered. Robert, we've got to get more people to do that. What can I say? I think you've been very clear, Dr. Mulder. You've been very to the point, Corné. You and I agree on actually everything. I mean, I'm always a DA man, but I don't think you and the DA are very far apart. I can see a coalition. And Herman Mashaba too. He's a good man. And Musi, come on, Musi and Vusi. I want to see the Musi and Vusi show up here. We all get together. I don't want to be the leader. Okay? I have no interest. You could find your own one. And let's make this country what it deserves to be. I mean, we've wasted a quarter of a century. The ANC has, but we still have hope. And I'm not leaving.
Absolutely. Neither am I, Rob. I'm staying. My family, we're all staying. All of us are staying. The problem is this. If I go to Europe tonight and I keep my mouth shut and I don't say a word, people may think I'm one of them. If I say one word, they will know I'm not one of them. Either if I speak Afrikaans, English, doesn't matter. When I get back in South Africa and I get off the plane, I feel now I am home. This is our home. This is our country. Africa has become part and parcel of who we are. And we will survive in Africa, but we must understand we cannot put our future in the hands of another group or somebody else. We have to take responsibility for our own future. And I'm prepared to give it a go and try to find a coalition with all the good people in South Africa. And we are prepared to do that. And our party, as I've said, has got support in different communities. Our candidates came from different communities across racial lines. But in the end, I honestly believe in the long term, when things happen like it happened in KZN, a document like this is not good enough to protect me. And the citizens in KZN saw that. If they didn't take steps to protect themselves, it would have been a massacre. Because of that, you will not survive in Africa without a geographical base, and that is where independence come in, and we feel very strongly about that. We need to do that.
Corné, I cannot thank you enough. I can see on the chat bot you've picked up a lot of votes here. And when the coalition comes, you're going to be a very, very important part of it. Thank you very much. Godspeed. Keep up the good work on behalf of all of us South Africans.
Thank you, Rob. It's a real pleasure. And it was an honor to be here tonight and to discuss. And thank you for the interesting discussion. Our people should get involved. And I can just only say thank you very much.
Have a wonderful evening. See you soon.